When the world's most powerful nation starts making concessions to keep you close, you know something fundamental has changed. Turkey just proved that the rules of global power are being rewritten, and Washington is scrambling to catch up. The world order we've known for generations is cracking, and standing at the fault line is a nation that has quietly transformed itself from a compliant ally into something far more unpredictable, and honestly, far more powerful. Turkey, for most of the modern era, played a careful game. It sat comfortably between two worlds, maintaining strong ties with the United States and NATO, while keeping channels open to Moscow and Beijing. It was the dependable partner, the strategic buffer, the nation that knew its place in the Western alliance. But that version of Turkey is gone. What we're witnessing now is a country that no longer asks for permission. And the most dramatic proof of this transformation came not in Ankara, but in Washington. When Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan walked into the White House for a meeting that revealed just how much the balance of power has shifted. This wasn't just another diplomatic formality. This was the first time Erdogan had set foot in the Oval Office since 2019, and the circumstances surrounding the visit sent shockwaves through foreign policy circles around the world. Because here's what caught everyone off guard. It wasn't Turkey that requested the meeting. It was the United States. According to investigative reporting by the Financial Times, American officials were the ones who reached out, concerned that Ankara was drifting too far into the orbit of Russia and China. Washington didn't summon Turkey to deliver warnings or set conditions. It invited Turkey because it was afraid of losing influence over a country it once took for granted. And that fear wasn't unfounded. Behind closed doors, Turkey had been systematically restructuring its economic relationships in ways that directly challenged American dominance. German publication Der Spiegel uncovered that Ankara had signed multiple trade agreements with China to conduct transactions in Turkish lira and Chinese yuan, deliberately cutting the US dollar out of the equation. At the same time, Turkey began quietly reducing its holdings of American Treasury bonds, redirecting those funds into gold reserves and diversified international assets. For Washington, this was more than an economic inconvenience. It was a strategic threat. The US dollar's global dominance isn't just about finance, it's about power. When countries start trading outside the dollar system, they weaken America's ability to influence global markets, enforce sanctions, and project economic pressure. And Turkey wasn't just testing the waters, it was building an alternative framework. So when President Donald Trump sat down with Erdogan, he didn't come empty-handed. He came with offers designed to pull Turkey back into the fold. Trump publicly suggested he was willing to reconsider Turkey's expulsion from the F-35 fighter jet program, a severe penalty imposed after Ankara purchased Russia's advanced S-400 air defense system. He also guaranteed that tariffs on Turkish goods would remain capped at 10%, even as the United States escalated trade wars with other nations. These weren't gestures of goodwill. They were concessions born out of necessity. And here's what makes this moment so significant. Turkey didn't have to threaten anyone to get these offers. It simply pursued its own interests with enough conviction that Washington felt compelled to respond. But let's step back for a moment and understand how we got here. For decades, Turkey occupied a unique position in global geopolitics. As a NATO member since 1952, it served as the alliance's southeastern anchor, controlling critical territory along the borders of the Middle East, the Caucasus, and the Black Sea. It hosted American military bases, participated in joint operations, and functioned as a reliable partner in containing Soviet influence during the Cold War. Even after the Soviet Union collapsed, Turkey remained strategically indispensable. It bridged Europe and Asia. It controlled access to the Bosphorus Strait, one of the world's most important maritime choke points. And it maintained relationships across the Islamic world that Western powers couldn't easily replicate. But over the past decade, something shifted. Turkey began to see itself not as a junior partner in someone else's alliance, but as a power in its own right. And under Erdogan's leadership, that perception translated into increasingly bold foreign policy decisions. Turkey launched military operations in Syria without seeking NATO approval. It deepened energy cooperation with Russia through the Turk Stream gas pipeline, a project that directly undermined European efforts to reduce dependence on Russian energy. It expanded its influence across Central Asia through the Organization of Turkic States, positioning itself as a cultural and political leader in a region where both China and Russia also compete for influence. Each of these moves signaled the same message. Turkey would no longer automatically align itself with Western priorities. It would act according to its own calculations, even when those calculations diverged sharply from what Washington or Brussels expected. And the reaction in Western capitals? Well, it's really a mix of frustration, concern, and honestly, a grudging acknowledgement that Turkey could no longer be taken for granted. According to Politico Europe, recent NATO meetings have been marked by some pretty uncomfortable conversations about Turkey's growing autonomy. Western diplomats, speaking on background, admitted that Ankara was charting its own course, and that alliance unity could no longer be assumed. While Turkey remains formally committed to NATO, its actions increasingly suggest a country that views the alliance as one option among many, not the defining framework of its foreign policy. Back in Turkey, however, the narrative looks completely different. Domestic media outlets celebrated Erdogan's Washington visit as a moment of national triumph. Commentators argued that Turkey's firm and independent stance had forced the United States to approach Ankara with respect, offering concessions that would have been, frankly, unthinkable just a few years ago. Hurriyet Daily News, one of Turkey's leading publications, framed the meeting as proof that Turkey could negotiate with the world's most powerful country on equal terms. For many Turks, this narrative resonates deeply. It speaks to a sense of national pride, to the belief that Turkey is reclaiming its rightful place on the world stage after years of being treated as a secondary player. Erdogan has successfully positioned himself as the leader who refuses to be bullied or sidelined, who stands up to both Western pressure and regional rivals. But there's another side to this story, one that doesn't fit neatly into the triumphal narrative. Turkey's economy is in serious trouble. Inflation has soared past 60%, eroding the purchasing power of ordinary citizens and fueling widespread frustration. The Turkish lira has lost significant value, making imports more expensive and putting pressure on businesses and households alike. Despite government efforts to stabilize the situation, many Turks are struggling with rising costs for food, energy, and basic necessities. From Ankara's perspective, renewed engagement with Washington offers a potential lifeline. The promise of avoiding punitive tariffs and the possibility of regaining access to advanced military technology could provide economic relief and breathing room at a critical moment. These aren't symbolic victories. They have real implications for Turkey's fiscal stability and its ability to manage ongoing economic pressures. So while the domestic rhetoric emphasizes strength and independence, the economic reality is far more complicated. Turkey needs the benefits that come with maintaining strong ties to the West, even as it pursues partnerships elsewhere. Meanwhile, in Washington, the calculus behind re-engagement is equally pragmatic. According to the Wall Street Journal, Trump's willingness to meet with Erdogan and offer concessions wasn't driven by affection or diplomacy. It was driven by strategic urgency. American officials are acutely aware that a Turkey firmly aligned with Russia and China could help form a powerful alternative bloc capable of challenging U.S. influence across the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Eastern Mediterranean. A breakdown in relations with Ankara would weaken NATO's cohesion and shift the balance of power in regions where American presence is already contested. It would also signal to other countries that breaking away from the U.S.-led order is not only possible, but potentially advantageous. And that's a message Washington cannot afford to let spread. This explains why the White House appears willing to overlook Turkey's controversial domestic policies and its increasingly open cooperation with Moscow. The stakes are simply too high, but not everyone in Washington is on board with this approach. Several Republican lawmakers have openly criticized the idea of restoring Turkey's access to F-35 aircraft, arguing that sharing sensitive military technology with a country that maintains close ties to Russia poses unacceptable security risks. They've warned that Turkey's unpredictable decision-making could compromise NATO intelligence and endanger allied operations. Despite these objections, the broader trend is clear. Turkey is no longer a compliant junior partner. It is pursuing what analysts call a multi-directional strategy, leveraging its geographic position and diplomatic flexibility to extract benefits from both Eastern and Western powers. And this strategy is being noticed far beyond Washington and Ankara. In Beijing and Moscow, Turkey's recent maneuvers have been interpreted as evidence of a shifting global order. China's state-affiliated Global Times argued that Washington's concessions were not voluntary acts of diplomacy, but forced responses to Turkey's demonstrated capacity to pursue alternatives beyond the Western sphere. Russian state media echoed this assessment, suggesting that Turkey has finally shed the image of a subordinate NATO member and emerged as an independent actor, capable of shaping international outcomes. From an economic standpoint, analysts are particularly focused on Turkey's efforts to reduce its exposure to the US dollar. By gradually shifting toward bilateral trade arrangements conducted in local currencies, Turkey could set a precedent that encourages other nations dissatisfied with American monetary dominance to explore similar strategies. Bloomberg has reported that confidential discussions are underway within Turkish leadership circles to expand trade with countries like Iran, Azerbaijan, and India, using national currencies rather than dollars. If these initiatives gain traction, they could significantly erode the dollar's dominance across large parts of Eurasia, a development with profound implications for global finance. Strategic researchers at Chatham House have characterized Turkey's trajectory as the emergence of a new center of power, one that is neither fully aligned with the East nor anchored to the West. Instead, Turkey appears determined to position itself as a flexible intermediary, capable of engaging all sides, leveraging competing interests, and making independent decisions rather than serving as a loyal extension of any geopolitical bloc. This posture is inherently risky. Miscalculations could lead to isolation, economic instability, or conflict. But it also makes Turkey an increasingly valuable partner in a world marked by division and uncertainty. Just a few years ago, Turkey was struggling with internal instability, economic pressure, and public dissatisfaction. Today, it is steadily gaining recognition as a pivotal state in a rapidly evolving global framework. The recent engagement in Washington made one reality unmistakable. The United States does not want Turkey to drift beyond its influence. But the more complex debate is happening within Turkey itself. Is the country content with its traditional role as an ally, or is it prepared to redefine itself as a power that helps shape the rules rather than simply follow them? Domestically, this question remains deeply contested. Opposition leaders have accused President Erdogan of using international diplomacy to bolster his personal authority while failing to address the economic hardships facing ordinary citizens. According to reporting by Cumhuriyet, the Republican People's Party has argued that promised reforms remain largely symbolic while inflation continues to erode wages and living costs rise relentlessly. People don't feel progress in their daily lives, one opposition figure stated. Yet even Erdogan's critics acknowledge that Turkey's growing global stature is undeniable. The country is being courted by major powers in ways that would have seemed unlikely not long ago. Beijing views Turkey as a vital link in its Belt and Road Initiative, serving as a natural corridor between Asia and Europe. Chinese companies have already invested heavily in infrastructure projects across major Turkish cities, deepening economic ties that extend far beyond trade. Moscow, meanwhile, continues to expand energy cooperation with Ankara, confident that Turkey's improving relations with Washington will not undermine its broader strategy of maintaining diversified partnerships. Increasingly, analysts describe Turkey as a key pillar of an emerging multipolar international order, A decade ago, Turkey was widely viewed as a useful but secondary NATO member. Today, it plays a meaningful role in shaping dynamics across regions ranging from the Black Sea to the Middle East. Its defining strength lies in its ability to navigate rivalries among the United States, China, Russia, and the European Union, converting competition into strategic advantage. This diplomatic flexibility has elevated Ankara's position as a potential mediator and placed Erdogan at the center of global attention. But caution remains warranted. Experts at the Brookings Institution have warned that Turkey's balancing act may eventually face limits. As global tensions intensify, Ankara could be forced to make difficult choices that alienate one or more of the powers it currently engages. For now, however, Turkey continues to extract benefits from every direction, expanding trade with Asia, securing energy ties with Russia, and maintaining leverage with Western partners. It thrives in ambiguity, transforming global friction into opportunity. This calculated adaptability remains its greatest asset. The ability to engage all sides, avoid permanent alignment, and quietly influence the shifting balance of power. The question is no longer whether Turkey matters. The question is how far it can push this strategy before the world forces it to choose a side. And judging by what just happened in Washington, that moment may be further away than anyone expected. Because when a superpower starts making concessions just to keep you at the table, you're no longer just a player in the game. You're changing the rules. Turkey's rise as an independent power isn't just a story about one nation's ambitions. It's a signal that the old order, where a handful of superpowers dictated terms to the rest of the world, is breaking down. And in the cracks, new centers of influence are emerging. Turkey is one of them, and it's making the most powerful nation on earth take notice.